In the mid-1960s, a cipher-sending murderer stalked the streets of California. He would strike and strike again, and then taunt the police with letters containing secret codes. Even today, the case is still baffling, expert, and now a new DNA test has opened up a whole can of worms. So, who was the Zodiac killer? We may finally have the answer. The story began in December 1968, when two teenagers, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were shot multiple times while parked in a secluded area in Northern California. They had been sitting in Faraday's car after attending a high school football game. But before they could drive home, a stranger approached their car and fired several shots. Both victims were pronounced dead at the scene. Police didn't connect the two deaths at first. In fact, they wouldn't link any other crimes to this case for another year. That's because the Zodiac killer took a long holiday between his first two murders. It wasn't until late July 1969 that the body of another young woman was discovered. Her name was Darlene Ferrin, and she had been stabbed multiple times. There was no logical reason behind the attacks, and no apparent connection between the victims, which made the crime even more unnerving. All three lived in different parts of the state and were completely unrelated. However, the following month, two more women were attacked. Unlike the previous cases, these attacks were definitely connected. On August 4th, Sherry Jo Bates and Marianne Jip were both out with their boyfriends when they were approached by an assailant. Jip managed to fend off her attacker, but Bates was stabbed multiple times and left in critical condition. She survived the ordeal, however, and would later tell police that she had seen a man with a knife standing over her. He had a neatly trimmed mustache and was wearing a blue shirt. So, the police now had a physical description of the perpetrator, but that wasn't all they received. On August, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. Inside was a coded message, along with a drawing of a clock face with the hour, minutes, and second hands pointing to 12, 3, and 45, respectively. When deciphered, the message read, "I want to give my love to all the lonely women on the red light." Proof. Signed off with a flourish. The writer added, "Yours truly, the Zodiac." Though it wasn't immediately clear what the code meant, the police soon realized that the killer had given them a clue. As it turned out, the code simply referred to the time he had attacked Bates. It was 12:35 a.m. The mystery writer had just told them exactly what time he struck. But why? Was he trying to intimidate them, or perhaps boasting about his crimes? Well, whatever the reason, this was only the beginning. The next few years saw a terrifying rise in violent crimes across California. By every now and then, the police would receive a letter postmarked from the killer himself. They never caught him in the act, but they did find some of his discarded belongings, like a hat and gloves, which were used to match the physical descriptions of witnesses. They even found his car, a black 1966 Dodge Dart. Some believe the killer knew this, reveling in the fact that he was one step ahead of law enforcement. There was also evidence that he enjoyed the notoriety, sending taunting letters to the press. In total, 4 people were killed and 3 wounded in attacks linked to the Zodiac killer. But by the end of 1969, the case went cold. Did the killer stop his gruesome spree, or did the police just get tired of chasing shadows? Neither is true. Instead, the culprits switched tactics. You see, the Zodiac killer took a break from writing to the press, but he didn't abandon his hobby altogether. It wasn't until October 11th, 1970 that the public heard from him again. A letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle containing a coded message. Once again, the killer bragged about how he was smarter than the police and warned them to keep a lookout for more bodies. This time, though, there was a twist. Along with the letter was a small piece of cloth. Tests revealed that it contained fibers from the clothes worn by one of his victims. This was a big breakthrough for the police, although they didn't know it at the time. You see, the killer had unwittingly given them a vital clue. But once again, he taunted them with a message that read, "You'll never catch me. I have been, am, and always will be your no one suspect." Then he signed off with a flourish. Zodiac. Incredibly, this wasn't the last time the killer wrote to the Chronicle. Between 1970 and 1974, they received 12 letters from him. Most of them were coded messages with bizarre drawings, but one was not. Written in 1973, this letter explained the killer's fascination with death and included details of his victim. The police suspected that someone else had written it, but forensic tests proved otherwise. It was definitely the work of the Zodiac killer. But as the years passed without a resolution, interest in the case faded, and so did the killer's communications. Did he grow bored? Or maybe he was scared to be caught? Well, whatever the reason, the case remained officially unsolved. But many people were still convinced that the police had the wrong guy. Theories abounded, especially about Paul Avery, a journalist who worked for the San Francisco Chronicle. After receiving one of the killer's letters, Avery began investigating the case. He became so consumed with finding the culprit that he neglected his job. Unsurprisingly, he was fired. Soon after, he began acting erratically and was eventually committed to a psychiatric institution, where he died of a drug overdose in 1974. Many believed that Avery had become the Zodiac killer's final victim. Yet, despite the lack of evidence, some still claimed Avery was guilty. But what about Arthur Lee Allen? In the early 1970s, he became the prime suspect in the case. After all, he matched the physical description of the killer, and he even had a history of violence against women. Furthermore, a microscopic analysis of some hair found at one of the crime scenes suggested that it came from Allen. Unfortunately, this was later disproven. After being cleared of suspicion, Allen continued to lead a normal life. But that all changed in 1976, when police searched his home and found some bizarre souvenirs. They uncovered a number of weapons, including knives and guns, along with a strange collection of pornography, women's clothing, and shoes. Plus, they found a heavy table that matched the description of one featured in a witness statement. But none of this was conclusive, and Allen was never charged. That honor went to Ross Sullivan, a local school teacher who had been arrested on suspicion of murder in the past. Like Allen, Sullivan's DNA was run against the evidence, but once again, it came back That brings us to the latest news. Recently, the police ran the DNA from under one of the victim's fingernails through a genealogy website called GetMatch. And guess what they found? A distant relative of the Zodiac killer. His name was Gary Francis Post. Sadly, he died in 2018, but that doesn't mean the case is closed. You see, Blit, the police are now tracing his family tree in hopes of finding other relatives who might have his DNA. If they do, they can compare it to the crime scene evidence and put this decades-long mystery to bed. But until then, we're left wondering if the notorious killer will finally be identified. After all, with more than 20 potential victims, it's likely that one of his descendants has volunteered their DNA to the database. And if they find a match, we'll know beyond a shadow of a doubt who was the Zodiac killer. Drop a comment, like, and subscribe for more freaky mysteries unsolved.